Hey trainers, it's me Ryan Swag here. So this is part 3 of my battle parties and gym offense kind of series here, part 3 of 3. Part 1 covers the best counters to some of the best gym defenders. Part 2 covers wrapping up all that information into one complete package battle party of 6 to handle all gymming scenarios. And part 3 here is going to cover more alternative options, like hey, if you don't have that legendary guy, what can you use instead? So if you haven't seen part 1 or part 2 yet, they are linked below. I suggest checking them out. So let's get into it with these alternative options. So similar to where we left off, these are the better gym defenders for the most part. Broad spectrum, doesn't cover every single good gym defender. And then this was the recommended battle party from part 2, which was having 2 to 3 fighting type Pokemon, a Tyranitar, a Raikou, and then sort of a flex pick. My recommendation was Dragonite, but you could also use like a Kyogre, a Groudon, a Mewtwo. The list goes on. So starting out with the fighting types, well, Machamp and Hariyama, they're already non-legendary, and Hariyama is pretty dang common. You can get Makuhitas everywhere, and Machamp is still a raid boss. So I'm fairly confident that you'll be able to get your hands on these guys, and they're still the best counters to the normal type Pokemon that kind of lock down the game. And they're also great counters to steel types and to ice types that are going to be in gyms. My recommendations are still to have 2 to 3 of them. You might want to just have 2 though, because without the legendary and pseudo-legendary Pokemon, they won't be able to handle the broad spectrum of like other Pokemon in gyms. So you might need some more coverage than just fighting type damage. So it gets a little controversial there. Living without, let me tell you. So for our first pseudo-legendary pick here that you might not have on your team, we have Tyranitar. And Tyranitar is great. You really want to have one. I extra recommend trying to get one as soon as you can. It's the best counter to Mewtwo. It's going to be one of the best counters to the Latios and Latias raids in the future. And if we get the Deoxys in the future as a raid boss, it'll also be a great counter there. Tyranitar just handles anything that's psychic type super well. And he can handle a broad spectrum of situations very well too. And as far as gym cleaning goes, dark type damage goes pretty unresisted, and he's got that 3-bar charge move crunch to just rip through it. So just a small plug, if you don't already have a good Tyranitar, I really recommend trying to get one. I mean, it's not that you're not trying, but maybe keep like an extra eye out, you know, for getting that good Tyranitar. Fortunately, if you don't have a Tyranitar, fixing that deficiency in your team isn't that big of a deal. My first recommendation would be Scizor. And the main reason why I'm repping Scizor here is because it's got that 3-bar charge move, X Scissor, so it can cut through things pretty quickly. Its steel typing still gives it a resistance to those psychic type Pokemon, so it's able to resist their attacks. And then as far as dealing with fairy types go, Tyranitar doesn't deal with them super well with dark type damage, but Scizor, being steel typing, can resist their fairy type blows, and because fairy types don't tolerate neutral hits that well, the bug type damage cuts through them very well too. Now you might be thinking, Ryan Swag, Scizor's got Bullet Punch and Iron Head, why wouldn't I just use those to deal with fairy types? The main reason why is because you don't really have to. I mean, bug type Scizor is doing it just as well as steel type Scizor is. And since Bug-type Scizor is able to hit the Psychic types for super effective damage, you probably want to stick with that. Your discretion, though. Now, if you don't like the idea of not having a Dark-type on your team, Houndoom is also a very good replacement. Might not be a dog. It's a dog. And yeah, cool thing about Houndoom is with Foul Play, in some scenarios, it can actually have higher DPS than Tyranitar. Now, I'm not recommending that you'd ever want to power up a Houndoom overpowering up a Tyranitar. Tyranitar is just so big, so thick, so strong that you basically want to power up a Tyranitar if you can power up a Tyranitar. Houndoom is great though. Great alternative to Tyranitar. These two make great placeholders. And other bug types and dark types work well too. Pinsir works well. Basically the same moveset as Scizor here. It doesn't have the steel typing, so it doesn't have the resistances to the fairies and the psychic type attacks, but still high potent bug DPS to bring down the psychic type Pokemon. And then alternative dark types, you could use Shiftry. Shiftry is great if you caught one wild really high level. You're not going to be powering up your Tyranitar placeholder anyways, so you may as well use that if you need to, have to, feel like you want to. If you're an Absol enthusiast, you're really not going to get a high level Absol since it's raid exclusive. You can't catch an Absol in the wild. As far as Ampium 1 Up goes, to be a placeholder for Tyranitar, that's kind of a stretch. I mean, if Absol is one of your favorite Pokemon, or you got the shiny one, you could use it in place of a Tyranitar, just not super recommended for like Stardust efficient use. You know what I mean? Covering Tyranitar, pretty easy recommendation there. Covering Raikou is a lot more tricky. And the reason why it's tricky to cover Raikou is because Raikou does so many things so well. It not only covers the bulky water types, which can be a pretty big pain to deal with if you're not hitting them super effectively, but it can also cover Dragonite very well, and it can also cover the fairy types and the psychic types super well too. The fairy types don't handle the neutral hits that well, and then as far as the psychic types go, slow dudes are some of the best ones, and they're hit super effectively by Raikou. And when it comes to the normal types, Raikou and its high potent neutral DPS also makes like a good sort of secondary adjunct counter to them as well. So there's a lot of stuff that Raikou is doing super good, and you know, hard out to you if you did not get one, or if you do not have the Stardust or the rare candy to really power one up. Now a good alternative for Raikou, not that big of a step down, is Zapdos, right? Zapdos is a very okay replacement for Raikou, but this is non-legendary, non-pseudo-legendary recommendations. So if you don't have a Raikou, stepping down to the Zapdos isn't that big of a deal. But if you don't have either, well then it gets a little bit tougher, because the best electric type after these legendary ones is the Jolteon here. Magneton and Manectric, they're also very good electric types, but they're not quite as good as Jolteon and not nearly as common. I mean, in some regions, I think Manectric's pretty dang common, but all that aside, I'd say in general, Jolteon is a decent replacement for Raikou. Now, the problem that Jolteon runs into, though, is that it's not that tanky itself. So while Raikou can, like, burn down through basically this whole lineup of Pokemon by itself with very little concern, Jolteon kind of gets stopped short, especially against bulkier water-type Pokemon. It takes them down fast, but it still takes those hits. The battles are still a bit long, even though Jolteon is doing it a bit quicker. So a little bit of slack there, yeah. Where in the previous video I talked about the 6 slot being kind of a flex option here. You might want to dedicate it to another sort of bulky water counter just to kind of cover how frail Jolteon's going to be for the role. But when it comes to countering stuff like Gyarados, for example, nobody's really going to do it better than Jolteon will. So there's a lot of trade-offs to be had. For that reason, if you don't have a Dragonite and you're looking for the flex option on the 6th slot, I'd say maybe you might want to dedicate that role to Executor. Now the reason why I say Executor is because when it comes to fighting bulkier water-type Pokemon, it can be quite the chore. Also, Executor has some bonus swag against Psychic types, being able to resist the Psychic type damage and retaliate with a Solar Beam. And Executor is still a great sort of secondary, maybe C-list counter to the normal types here. Slacking, you can't always want to fight it with a Machamp, so keep that in mind. But yeah, no, so Executor kind of picks up the slack that Jolteon has left off, so they kind of work well together. You know, double whammying on the water type Pokemon there. However, one thing that you will notice about this team right off the bat, using 3 fighting types, a Scizor, a Jolteon, and an Executor, is you really don't have an option against Dragonite. And that's kind of like the greater issue when it comes to a non-legendary and non-pseudo-legendary battle party for gymming, is that because these non-legendary, non-pseudo-legendary Pokemon don't really have as broad of coverage as the legendary and pseudo-legendary iterations. Mouthful there. Because of that, you're going to want to flex a bit more than you would with the, battle party from video 2. Flex a bit more. Where you don't have like a dedicated flex Pokemon like you had with Dragonite, you kind of want to use like any Pokemon on your team as a flex. So if you're up against a gym that has a Dragonite, depending on what the gym doesn't have in it, you might want to swap out any 4 of these Pokemon for essentially Cloyster. I'd say Cloyster is my top Dragonite-specific, non-Dragonite, counter, because it's got that Avalanche. It goes pretty quickly. A lot of people seem to like Lapras, but you can't get an Ice Beam Lapras anymore, which forces you to have Blizzard Lapras. And single bar charge moves aren't the funnest for gym offense, so that's something to keep in mind there. And then Piloswine. Piloswine's good too, I'd have to say, but yeah, I just kind of like Cloyster more. So yeah, Cloyster, Piloswine works. Jinx might be a little bit too flimsy. Walrein or Lapras, they all work too, but they got the single bar charge move, so might not be as great overall. And then, of course, Articuno, but that's a legendary Pokemon. Can't rep that. So yeah, and let's say if the gym doesn't have a Dragonite, but it's got some like particularly difficult like ground type Pokemon, and you just want to get through these ground types a lot faster, and you've got this Solar Beam kind of slowing you down. Well, Vaporeon is a great sub option. You could also use Gyarados, but single bar Hydro Pump versus the Aqua Tail, which can just rip through things. So that's another flex pick that you can swap into this party. Another good kind of generalized option is Golem. And a cool thing about Golem is that you can get away with using Stone Edge because the Rock Throw DPS is pretty similar to the DPS from its charge moves. So you can use the Stone Edge for like some big kind of fat boy that's in the gym, and you're like wham. But for everything else, you don't have to feel too guilty about holding on to your Stone Edge. So that's something to consider. Kind of a generalized option, good against fire types, flying types such as Dragonite. But I wouldn't recommend, you know, countering a Dragonite with a Golem over like a Cloyster or a Piloswine. So that's like another kind of area of difficulty, right? And another good Pokemon to consider for the flex here would be a Flareon. Flareon can handle the Fairy type super well, resisting their Dazzling Gleams. Fire types do that. It's also a pretty good like secondary C tier kind of counter to the normal types. And another thing that Flareon does well that the rest of the squad isn't doing so hot is countering Metagross. Metagross is in the game now, and I can't say that's the best defender. It's definitely a very okay defender, but not that threatening. But if you're not using a Dark type or a Fire type Pokemon to bring it down, you're going to be in for a more prolonged battle. So I feel like Flareon could be important for patching that up. And another thing that kind of goes less noticed with this squad is that this squad doesn't handle grass types that well, namely grass poison types such as Venusaur. So you get the bug hit, that's a neutral hit, grass hit, that's resisted, electric resisted, fighting resisted. So Flareon kind of comes in and burns down the grass, I guess, takes care of them pretty right quick there. So stuff to consider. Now all this confusion, all this debate gets a lot easier for each pseudo-legendary and legendary type that you can bring into your party. For example, if you have a Shadow Ball Mewtwo, probably the best generalist in the game as far as gym offense is concerned. I know it doesn't play with the Fairy type super well, but that's what you have Machamp for, right? Then Mewtwo can basically cover any of these roles very well and makes having to shift around your party a lot less of a headache. Of course, Raikou and Zapdos for doing the electric type thing. Dragonite, we have the community event coming up at this point in time, so very good generalist, keep your eyes peeled. I like Outrage better than Draco Meteor for gymming because Draco Meteor is a single bar charge move, but having a Dragonite is a huge boon for players that don't have one, so something to also be mindful of. And of course Tyranitar. So yeah, any of these roles get patched up a lot more once you bring legendaries and pseudo-legendaries into the mix. But if you're living without, or if you want to play a game without legendaries, then I would say this kind of battle party would be the one you want to roll with of course the sideline and flex picks. It gets tricky when you don't have the best stuff, I know. So, and I'm not trying to like condescend on players that choose to play this way or don't have the best options. I mean, I kind of went through that life myself for the longest time. I was the last person in my squad to get a Dragonite, so when we were doing like city takeovers and taking over a bunch of gyms, I was the person with 6 Vaporeons where everyone else had like 2 Dragonites and stuff, and I felt kind of soft there for the team. And then when Gen 2 came out, it took me forever to get a Tyranitar. So like I get that it's very difficult to get rare strong Pokemon, and if you don't have a whole lot of Stardust, legendary Pokemon can be kind of a hassle. So I know where you're coming from, and I hope you guys find this particular advice useful. So that's as far as my advice for battling gyms and building a gym battling battle party goes. Once again, this is part 3 of 3. Part 1 covers the best counters to the best gym defenders. Part 2 covers making the best sort of battle party to handle the broad spectrum of situations. And this here, part 3, went over more alternative options. You know, if you don't have legendaries and you don't have pseudo-legendaries, oh, what am I going to use then, Ryan Swag? So if you missed out on part 1 and part 2, link in the description. I suggest checking them out. I'm also considering maybe doing a by the weather, like part 4 in the future. It's just weather gets to be such a headache if you think about it too much, and then it just gets to be pretty easy where it's like, oh, it's raining, we'll just use like a water type and electric type. Oh, sunny outside, you use a fire type, you know? So I might do a part 4 in the future. If you're interested in a weather-specific part 4, maybe comment in the description, let me know you're into that. But if you feel like you got it handled, you're like, okay, Ryan Swag, you just did 3 parts of gym fighting, and gyms don't even matter, man. I could just leave it at that for now. If you want me to talk about any other topics, just comment below, let me know what you want to hear about. And if you haven't subscribed to SwagTips, I suggest you do that. It's a good idea. SwagTips. Potion efficiency. The most potion efficient counter to a gym is to have another teammate take it out for you.